At dawn in 1943, steam drifted across the frozen fields of Michigan as a new sound rose, the rhythm of production. Beneath a roof of glass and steel, workers guided vast silver bombers through a mile-long line of motion. Rivets hissed, engines growled, and the hum of machinery rolled like distant thunder across the snow. The place was called Willow Run, though few outside knew what it built. Every 63 minutes, another B-24 Liberator rolled into the light, numbers stenciled, wings gleaming, engines ready for war. 3 years earlier, the site had been farmland. Now it was the largest factory on Earth, raised not for cars, but for bombers. No aircraft company had ever done it. None believed it could be done. To build airplanes as if they were automobiles defied every rule of aviation. Experts dismissed it as fantasy. Engineers said the tolerances were too fine, the design too complex. But Ford Motor Company saw only a problem of organization and time. Across the assembly floor, thousands moved in practiced rhythm, men and women turning Detroit's logic into America's arsenal. They said it was impossible. Ford called it production. And from a cornfield outside Detroit, the war learned a new kind of weapon, the hour itself. In 1940, while Europe burned and the skies above Britain thundered with bombers, the United States still measured power in automobiles. Detroit's assembly lines turned out millions of cars each year, but the nation possessed fewer than 1,000 heavy aircraft. Factories that built engines and chassis could not yet build wings. America's strength lay in mobility, not in air power. The U.S. Army Air Corps knew this imbalance could prove fatal. If war came, the country would need bombers by the thousands, not the hundreds. Its leaders looked beyond traditional aircraft firms and turned toward an empire that understood mass production, the auto industry. Among its giants, Ford Motor Company stood unmatched. For 4 decades, Ford had shaped how the world built machines. The Model T had turned motion into routine, and the River Rouge plant had shown how raw ore could become an engine in a single flow. But airplanes were another matter. They demanded precision far beyond the standards of automobiles. Aviation engineers scoffed when the idea surfaced. You can't build bombers like sedans. The challenge focused on one aircraft, the consolidated B-24 Liberator. A massive, complex machine with over 450,000 parts, it required hundreds of skilled hands and months of labor. No automaker had ever attempted anything close. Even Ford executives hesitated. Yet Edsel Ford, Henry's son, and production chief Charles Sorensen believed differently. If cars could be built by the thousand, bombers could too. In meetings through late 1940, Sorensen spoke quietly, almost bluntly. If we can build cars by the clock, we can build planes by the hour. His proposal was radical, an airplane plant designed entirely around flow. Each fuselage, each wing, each engine would move on a conveyor, taking form in continuous motion until it reached the runway. Skeptics filled the air with doubt. Aluminum was too fragile, tolerances too tight, wings too long for machine tools. Consolidated engineers warned that a single misaligned joint could destroy the entire aircraft. The precision of flight could not survive the pace of a factory. Sorensen ignored them. He began sketching floor plans for what would become the largest building ever constructed for a single product. The site chosen lay in Ypsilanti Township, Michigan, flat farmland 20 miles west of Detroit. Surveyors arrived that winter, their boots cutting through frozen soil. Wooden stakes traced the outline of a building longer than a mile, wide enough to hold a city inside. Ford's architects called it Willow Run. Henry Ford gave his reluctant approval in early 1941. When the press announced the plan, headlines called it madness. Aviation Week dismissed the project. No firm can mass-produce bombers, yet construction began. Thousands of laborers poured concrete through blizzards, driving piles into the ground, while cranes vanished into snow. Columns rose one after another, forming a horizon of steel. By spring, the shell of the world's largest one-story factory stood against the cold. At its heart, Sorensen marked a single white line across the floor, the path the bombers would follow from birth to flight. America was not yet at war, but its factories were already learning how to fight one. The first sparks of the arsenal of democracy had just been struck, not in Washington, nor in the air, but on a quiet Michigan field where the impossible had begun to take shape. By September 1941, the Willow Run project had grown beyond ambition. What began as a drawing on Charles Sorensen's desk had become a continent of steel. Cranes stalked the horizon. The air smelled of concrete and diesel. Across 900 acres of Michigan farmland, a city for machines was rising, complete with dormitories, foundries, and rail lines that vanished into distance. When finished, it would be the largest factory on Earth, 1 mile long, 1 story high, and built to run without pause. Inside Ford's drafting offices, optimism met resistance. The B-24 Liberator was never meant for a moving line. The aircraft had been born in San Diego workshops where craftsmen shaped parts by hand, one at a time. Blueprints existed in fragments. No two planes were alike. Sorensen's team dismantled existing bombers, traced their parts, and redrew every component to uniform scale. Aluminum replaced steel jigs. Templates replaced guesswork. For the first time, the B-24 would exist as a system, not an art. The transformation was brutal. Each part that once relied on hand-fitting had to be redesigned for machines. The long Davis wing, famous for its lift, was a nightmare for alignment. A single misdrilled hole could twist an entire airframe. Ford engineers learned to think in thousandths of an inch. Errors that once meant rework now meant collapse. Every mistake multiplies. Sorensen warned, fix it at the start. By winter 1941, Willow Run's shell stood complete, a roof of steel and glass stretching 1.6 kilometers, covering 3.5 million square feet. Beneath it, crews installed conveyors, presses, and overhead cranes adapted from the automobile trade. Each tool carried a new name and a new rule: standardize, simplify, synchronize. The cost exceeded $47 million, but Ford called it the price of speed. Then came the people. Trains rolled in from Kentucky, Ohio, and the Upper Peninsula, bringing welders, machinists, and families looking for work. Entire towns grew around the factory, trailers, canteens, and muddy roads glowing under floodlights. Few of those workers had ever touched an aircraft part. They learned to read blueprints between shifts and to rivet aluminum with the precision once reserved for watchmakers. By spring, the population of Willow Run rivaled small cities. The line was designed backward, from runway to raw metal. Sorensen's logic was simple: begin where the bomber would take off and let the process flow toward the source. Aluminum sheets entered at one end. Fuselages, wings, and engines advanced through more than 1,000 stations. At the far end, the finished bomber would emerge, roll out the door, and taxi straight to flight tests. But nothing worked as smoothly as the plan. The first test assembly halted after only a few stages. Jigs flexed, rivet holes missed, and panels refused to meet. The parts were perfect to see, but not for each other. The aircraft sagged on its frame like a wounded bird. Sorensen stood above the line and said nothing. The silence lasted a full minute before he ordered the structure torn apart. "We start again," he said. By December, the world had changed. Japan struck Pearl Harbor, and America entered the war. Overnight, the Willow Run experiment became a national necessity. The deadline was no longer Ford's, it was Washington's. The factory doubled its shifts. Crews worked through snowstorms under heaters that barely kept pace with the cold. Temperatures inside dropped below freezing. Tools stuck to gloves. Yet the line never stopped. Sorensen turned failure into routine. Each time a problem surfaced, it became a lesson. Fixtures grew heavier. Measurements grew stricter. He replaced soft jigs with steel master gauges anchored to the concrete. A thousandths inch variation now had its own inspection team. Each department kept a defect chart: red pins for faults, green pins for fixes. By spring 1942, the walls glittered with green. The first successful B-24 assembled at Willow Run rolled onto the floor that May. It was imperfect. One tailplane drooped slightly and the paint bore streaks, but it flew. Reporters gathered to see the strange aircraft born from a car plant. Its name, stenciled in black on the nose, read "The Spirit of Ford." Sorensen said nothing to the cameras. The result spoke for itself. Skeptics still filled the papers. "A plane an hour," one editor wrote, "belongs to fiction." But Ford was already looking past the headline. The real test would not be one plane or 10, but the thousands that followed, each identical, each on time. To reach that, the line had to think for itself. Through the summer of 1942, the hum of Willow Run grew steadier. Supply trains from feeder plants arrived with wings, turrets, and landing gear in pre-packed kits. Crates bore exact serials tied to the line schedule. Ford's logistics system, once designed for sedans, now served bombers. Overhead cranes moved assemblies like clock hands. By autumn, the plant no longer looked like chaos. Workers found rhythm in repetition. Women in overalls stood at drill presses. Men lifted wing spars into jigs without shouting. Foremen no longer issued orders. They adjusted timing. Efficiency became a habit. Sorensen began calling the factory a living clock. Outside, the cornfields that once surrounded the plant had vanished under concrete and smoke. A new runway extended east, lit by rows of lamps that disappeared into haze. At night, the entire complex glowed orange against the sky, a beacon to anyone flying overhead. By the end of 1942, Ford's experiment had crossed its threshold. What had begun with doubt now ran with method. The red pins had nearly vanished from the boards. The first true mass-produced B-24S rolled to the hangar doors. The impossible idea had learned to move, and the sound it made was the rhythm of America preparing to fight a global war. January 1942. The first winter of war arrived with ice on the windows and steam rising from the unfinished roof of Willow Run. The factory opened before it was ready. Floodlights hung from bare trusses, floor paint still wet, blueprints pinned to wooden posts instead of walls. Workers wore coats and gloves at their benches, their breath visible in the air. The new line moved, but only in fits and starts. The early weeks were chaos. Conveyors jammed, jigs slipped, rivet holes missed their marks by fractions of an inch. The B-24's long Davis wing punished every imperfection. Sorensen walked the floor at dawn, chalk in hand, marking failures in silence. Each day ended with the same order: measure again, align again, drill again. Every mistake repeats, he said. Fix it where it begins. Red tag tables filled with rejected parts, warped frames, miscut skins, gear doors that wouldn't close. The engineers treated them like battlefield maps. They traced faults backward through the line, station by station, until the cause appeared. A bad gauge, a soft jig, a drawing slightly off. Each discovery became a correction, a small victory in the unseen war against error. Training was relentless. Men from car plants learned to buck rivets, to shape aluminum without cracking it. Women arrived in increasing numbers, many wearing uniforms stitched from their own factory overalls. They learned by repetition, riveting, drilling, sealing, until their hands moved faster than thought. Posters on the walls said nothing about patriotism. They said only, "Accuracy saves time." The supply chain tested every promise. The bomber needed engines, guns, radios, tires, and miles of wire. Crates from 50 factories arrived each day. Trucks bogged down in mud as though we saw met frost. Ford responded by building its own rail spurs and satellite plants. Wing panels came pre-drilled, bulkheads painted, wiring harnesses labeled for each bay. For the first time, sub-assemblies flowed in step with the line. Sorensen tightened control. Soft templates were replaced with heavy steel fixtures bolted into the floor. New gauges were built to detect even thousandths of an inch in variation. Inspectors patrolled each stage, checking tolerance with calipers worn shiny from constant use. Quality no longer lived at the end of the line. It was enforced at every motion. Still, the learning curve cut deep. Heat warped the thin aluminum skins near the bomb bay. Smoke pooled under the high ceiling, clouding lamps. Sorensen ordered exhaust fans installed along the roof and split the workload into shorter, faster cycles. Each station was timed to the minute. Foremen rewrote charts every night, chasing seconds as if they were fuel. On the mezzanine, planners adjusted conveyor speed, balancing chaos against progress. Too fast, and errors multiplied. Too slow, and output collapsed. They found the rhythm by experiment. Chalkboards at each bay listed time targets in white numerals. Crews learned to read the board without looking up, to feel the pace in their hands. When one bay fell behind, roving teams moved in to recover the lost minutes. By May, the factory was no longer a classroom. It was a system under stress. Each shift began with a whistle, each break timed to the second. Workers came and went in silence, faces gray with fatigue and metal dust. But skill had replaced confusion. The line no longer stumbled. It hesitated, then found motion again. Night shifts carried the discipline further. Older hands taught newcomers by gesture, the angle of a drill, the sound of a proper rivet, the touch that sealed a joint without tearing the skin. The difference showed in the scrap bins: fewer rejects, smaller piles, less noise. The plant had learned its own language, spoken in steel and timing. The workforce became its own town. Buses arrived before dawn, headlights cutting through fog. The cafeteria fed thousands each meal, rows of trays moving as precisely as parts on a line. Nearby, a small medical station treated burns and cuts, then sent workers back within the hour. Productivity was a living creed. Each day, Sorensen began his rounds at the far end of the building, where the bombers would one day emerge. From there, he walked backward along the line, tracing each step to the source. When a section failed, he stopped the conveyor and stared at the joint until he understood why. His presence carried no speeches, only numbers. He kept a small notebook of times, failures, and fixes. It grew thicker each week. Engines arrived from Pratt and Whitney, their surfaces wrapped in oiled paper. Teams mounted them to nacelles using slings and chain hoists. The fit was now precise enough that bolts slid in by gravity alone. Fuel lines were tested under pressure. Leaks became rare. Every column that passed inspection bore a small chalk mark, a quiet signal of improvement. Electrical work remained the greatest challenge. Wiring a bomber was an art few understood. Ford solved it by creating a full-scale mock-up of the fuselage, where women pinned wires along boards shaped like the plane's interior. Each harness was labeled, taped, and tested before it reached the line. Once installed, the lights came on at the first switch. Gun turrets followed the same principle. They were heavy, delicate, and unforgiving of error. Engineers designed cradles that rotated the turrets to exact angles for installation. What once took hours now took minutes. The line advanced without strain. Summer heat brought new trials. Aluminum expanded. Joints loosened. Workers fainted under the lamps. Ford installed roof vents, fans, and water stations at regular intervals. Even in 90-degree heat, the line did not stop. Efficiency had become survival. By late summer 1942, Willow Run resembled less a factory than an organism. Each section fed the next, each delay corrected itself before it grew. The red tag tables emptied. Foremen no longer shouted, they adjusted. The noise changed, a steady hum instead of scattered clangs. The chaos of January had hardened into rhythm. Outside, the airfield took shape. Concrete crews poured the last runway slabs, aligning them with the plant doors. Soon, the bombers would not just be assembled here, they would fly from here. Each evening, as floodlights blinked to life and night crews filed in, the mile-long building glowed against the Michigan dark. From the highway, travelers could see the roofline shimmering with heat, the symbol of an experiment no longer theoretical. Ford had not yet won the race for speed, but it had conquered stillness. The impossible machine was learning to move by its own momentum. The first sound of mass production, a rhythm, smooth and certain, now filled the night air, marking the moment America began to build victory by the hour. By late 1942, the noise of chaos had faded. In its place came precision, measured, timed, and logged. Quality charts appeared beside every clock, their dots tracing drill size, torque, and spacing. When a line drifted off target, the work stopped until the reason was known. There were no speeches, only the sound of pens marking data. Discipline replaced faith. Routine replaced luck. Ford's feeder network tightened. River Rouge cast fittings. Dearborn stamped wing ribs. Ohio supplied doors and spars. Trains arrived with crates already sequenced for the line. Each kit contained exactly 10 airframes worth of parts. Nothing more, nothing missing. The flow that once depended on chance now followed mathematics. Sorensen turned repetition into refinement. Fuselage sections were rotated on powered stands to bring every joint within reach. Rivet guns hung on spring balancers to save muscle and seconds. Tools were rearranged until no worker took an unnecessary step. Every gesture counted. Time became the only raw material that mattered. Winter tested the system again. Buses froze before dawn. Workers arrived wrapped in blankets. Sorensen built heated shelters at the gates and added covered walkways to keep them moving. A nursery opened near the parking lots so women could finish their shifts. The line's survival depended on every hour protected from the cold. Field reports from combat began to flow back: coolant leaks, turret jams, and vibration issues. Ford engineers turned the feedback into new fixtures and templates. Faults became data. Data became design. Each update moved from test stand to production in weeks. For the first time, frontline combat shaped the assembly line in real time. Variants followed. The D model gave way to the H, then the J. Each new version demanded hundreds of changes. Under old systems, retooling would have meant shutdowns. At Willow Run, it meant adaptation. The line absorbed revisions without losing rhythm. Aluminum sheets bore new drill patterns. Workers adapted without pause. Flexibility had become part of the machinery. Inspection grew sharper. Instead of waiting for end-of-line discovery, every station owned its quality. Gauge blocks hung from belts. Spark testers hunted electrical faults before wires vanished behind panels. Small mirrors checked hidden rivets. A single red mark on a chart could stop the conveyor, not as punishment, but as proof that precision still mattered. By spring 1943, defects had fallen below aviation's own standards. Engines demanded their own discipline. Test stands replicated flight loads with cables and dampers. Each nacelle ran under vibration sensors, each reading logged. When one set hit a bad frequency, dampers were changed on the spot. The first time 4 engines passed test without adjustment, crews signed their names on the bulkhead. It was the quiet pride of people who had beaten time by precision. The runway outside now buzzed daily. Completed bombers taxied to chalked spots for checks, flaps cycling, hydraulics humming, bomb bay doors opening in the sunlight. The air shimmered from heat. A year earlier, this had been farmland. Now, every hour, another machine touched concrete and waited for flight crews. Inside, the workforce moved like a practice tide. Veterans led with gestures more than words. A single nod replaced a lecture. The plant taught itself, one repetition at a time. Productivity was no longer a goal, it was instinct. Sorensen shifted focus from motion to flow. He synchronized feeder lines to match the conveyor's pace, creating small buffer zones where parts could gather but never pile. When one section ran slow, another absorbed the slack. The buffers turned delay into rhythm, smoothing the pulse of the factory. Material handling followed the same logic. Forklifts gave way to electric tugs, each pulling low carts labeled in letters large enough to read from the floor. Every cart carried one station's worth of parts, no more. Confusion disappeared. The path of each piece could be traced by sight alone. The visual order became the factory's new language. By mid-1943, Willow Run no longer chased goals. It met them by habit. Schedules written at dawn were met by dusk. Equipment failures no longer broke the rhythm. Backups took over within minutes. Redundancy was planned, not improvised. Managers began to talk about flow rates instead of quotas. Edsel Ford still visited when he could. Weakened by illness, he walked the line in silence, asking for numbers, not praise. He understood what he saw. The dream that had nearly broken under its own weight now ran with the ease of breathing. A few months later, he was gone. The work continued, steady as before. Training became systemized. A compact school operated beside the main floor, teaching riveting, reading prints, and safety in 4-week cycles. Instructors pulled examples directly from yesterday's errors. Every correction in class meant fewer red tags on the floor. The plant had become its own teacher, feeding lessons back into the process. Outside, logistics tightened further. Weather bulletins arrived hourly to the dispatch office. When storms threatened, completed bombers were moved under cover, and trains carrying subassemblies rerouted south. Willow Run had learned to anticipate disruption, not react to it. The paint shop became a study in airflow and chemistry. Filters scrubbed over spray. Nozzles were calibrated to grams per second. Serial numbers were sprayed through stencils cut by machine, coats cured under steady heat until the surface mirrored the lamps above. Each bomber emerged with a skin as smooth as glass, uniform, flawless, identical. The final challenge was time itself. Sorensen's planners broke long stations into timed beats, each task measured in minutes. Seats, radios, and armor went in separately, synchronized like notes in a score. If one bay slipped by 60 seconds, the delay was visible by noon and corrected by dusk. The plant now thought in hours, not days. Summer returned, bringing heat and light. Fans whirred above the line, drawing air through the vents. Water stations multiplied. Brakes were staggered to keep the current flowing. The building, once burdened by its size, now functioned as one machine. It breathed, balanced, and corrected itself. By autumn 1943, Willow Run had crossed another invisible line. The plant no longer fought for control. It possessed it. Visitors spoke of rhythm more than machinery, of a sound that carried through the entire mile, not noise, but cadence. A plane might still pause on the line, but never from confusion, only sequence. In early 1944, the long-sought number appeared on the production board. One completed B-24 every 63 minutes. The workers did not cheer. They adjusted tools, cleared debris, and kept moving. The miracle was routine. The achievement was not speed. It was order, the conversion of chaos into pattern, of time into force. Ford had turned the impossible into a process. At the edge of the airfield, the doors opened again. Another Liberator rolled into the light, engine silent, paint gleaming under snow-white skies. The next one would follow in exactly 1 hour. The rhythm of war had found its perfect beat. By early 1944, the experiment no longer needed defending. Willow Run had become an engine of its own, vast, steady, and self-sustaining. The snow outside melted faster along its mile-long roof, the air inside trembling with the constant hum of machinery. Beneath the glass and steel, the factory no longer fought chaos. It measured it, timed it, and turned it into progress. Every 63 minutes, the far doors opened, and a new B-24 Liberator rolled into the cold Michigan light. Wings glinted like mirrors, propellers gleamed with fresh oil, and serial numbers dried under the lamps. Beyond the airfield, flight crews waited in the wind as each bomber taxied forward, one every hour, every day, without pause. The sound was not thunder. It was rhythm, mechanical, deliberate, alive. The mile of Willow Run had learned to breathe. Each bomber carried the weight of the continent behind it. The engines came from Connecticut, the radios from Chicago, the tires from Akron. Rivets from Pennsylvania held the wings built in Ohio, wired by hands from Kentucky and Michigan. It was the industrial map of a nation, condensed into aluminum and fuel. To the men who flew them, these bombers were weapons. To those who built them, they were proof that method could defeat distance. The scale defied imagination. Willow Run consumed a ton of aluminum every 20 minutes, gallons of paint every shift, and enough electricity to light an entire city. The cafeteria fed thousands 3 times a day. Conveyor belts moved 20 miles of materials in continuous motion. The building itself seemed to hum like a tuned instrument, the tempo marked not by whistles but by time cards. Workers no longer marveled at the scale. They measured their days by charts and clocks. Each bay knew its minute count. Each crew marked success not in praise, but in precision. A woman in the harness room could lay 500 feet of wire an hour. A rivet team finished a fuselage section in 22 minutes. Repetition had turned into mastery. Pilots from the Army Air Forces came daily to collect new aircraft. They called the site the Mile of Air. Across the runway, ranks of Liberators waited with engines idling, propellers spinning slow in the cold. The line seemed endless, silver, olive drab, and neutral gray stretching into haze. Pilots climbed aboard machines that still smelled of paint, signed release forms, and lifted into the winter sky. From above, Willow Run looked like a living diagram of war, trains feeding its spine, smoke drifting from vents, planes departing in a geometric procession. In 1940, such a vision had been laughed at. In 1944, it was routine. Each bomber joined a growing web of formations stretching across oceans. In England, Italy, and Burma, serial numbers beginning with 142 and Sukhant 43 appeared on flight rosters. These were Ford-built aircraft, identical in fit and balance, their engines aligned to the same thousandth of an inch. Crews noticed the difference. Willow Run planes flew smoother, consumed less fuel, and held altitude with less vibration. Mass production had not lowered quality. It had standardized excellence. Reports flowed back through the War Department. Ford-built Liberators bombed German oil refineries at Ploesti, supply depots in Italy, and Japanese convoys in the Pacific. Their mechanical reliability astonished flight crews. Some missions saw hundreds launched, hundreds returned. The plant's efficiency had become an invisible ally. Inside Willow Run, few workers followed the headlines. They had little time to read. The rhythm of production left no gaps. Shifts blurred into nights and nights into weeks. Families marked birthdays beside the assembly lines. Posters on the walls reminded them of the stakes. Every hour counts. At the top of that vast rhythm, Edsel Ford's name remained on every report, though its bearer was gone. He had died in 1943, worn down by illness and strain. The announcement came over the loudspeakers one morning. The line paused for a single minute, silent except for the ticking of the conveyor belts. Then it began again. The work had become larger than any one man. Through the summer of 1944, the factory reached full stride. 25 bombers a day rolled from its doors. More than 40,000 people labored in shifts around the clock. Floodlights kept the building bright as day through the night hours. Outside, freight trains waited to carry finished aircraft to Texas, Kansas, or Maryland, where wings would be unfolded and crews trained for flight. In Washington, production reports reached the War Department every week. The figures looked impossible, one factory producing more heavy bombers than entire nations. In Berlin and Tokyo, the same numbers appeared in intercepted cables, figures that turned disbelief into fear. By autumn, the effect filled the sky. Over Europe, clouds of B-24s passed over cities, their shadows crossing rivers and farmlands in waves. Each one traced its origin to Willow Run, to the mile of steel and glass that had turned time into weaponry. In 4 years, a cornfield had become the engine of Allied air power. Back inside, the routine deepened. Crews no longer needed instruction. New workers learned in hours what once took weeks. Supervisors spoke less and measured more. Precision became invisible, built into every fixture, every gesture. The air carried a steady hum, a mechanical pulse that never stopped. Fatigue became constant, yet few left. The war outside gave meaning to the hours inside. Workers bought war bonds, hung small flags by their stations, and wrote serial numbers of finished planes on walls beside their names. It was not pride in patriotism. It was pride in proof that the system worked. By December 1944, Willow Run had delivered its 8,000th bomber. The milestone passed quietly. Sorensen's note to his engineers was only one sentence: "Keep the hour steady." As winter returned, the horizon of victory drew closer. The Allies now held air supremacy. The B-24, once doubted as too complex for production, had become the backbone of strategic bombing. For every bomber lost, 2 more were already on the line. Inside the plant, the sense of urgency never faded. Christmas lights hung between cranes. Floodlights burned through snow. The line moved as always. On December 24th, workers watched another Liberator taxi into the night, the last of the year, bound for the Atlantic crossing. They stood silently until its engines disappeared into the clouds. Then they went back to work. In 1945, the war's end approached, and orders began to slow. The schedule shortened, then shifted to spare parts. But the line continued, smooth, precise, relentless, until the final aircraft reached completion in June. When the last bomber rolled out, workers filled the floor in silence. The hum stopped. The air seemed larger without it. For 3 years, Willow Run had produced a bomber every hour. It had turned disbelief into a system, and a system into victory. The doors closed behind the final Liberator. Floodlights dimmed and the echoes of machinery faded into the rafters. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of engines from planes already far away, the last of thousands born in this place. What began as an idea had ended as proof. Ford had built not only machines, but a process that changed the meaning of production itself. Across the world, nations fought with weapons. America fought with factories. And none captured that truth more completely than the mile of motion that turned a car plant into a symbol of industrial war. At Willow Run, the impossible had been built, tested, flown, and repeated, every hour on the hour, until time itself became the measure of victory. The war ended in the summer of 1945. Across the Pacific, silence replaced the roar that had filled the skies. At Willow Run, the hum that once never ceased began to fade. Workers stood in small groups along the line as news reached the loudspeakers. Japan had surrendered. The shift bells rang one final time, not to signal work, but to mark an ending. Inside the great hall, tools were left where they lay. Rivet guns cooled, conveyors slowed to a stop. The mile of windows, once bright with daylight and arc lamps, now reflected only stillness. The factory that had built bombers by the hour was suddenly without a war to feed. The last B-24 rolled into the open air that September, engines rumbling across the same concrete poured in snow 4 years earlier. Men and women who had lived by the clock for nearly half a decade watched it lift into the sky and vanish eastward. Behind them, floodlights dimmed and the doors closed for the first time since 1942. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise that came before. In the months that followed, the transformation began again, this time backward. Fixtures were dismantled, gauges boxed, and conveyors sold for scrap. The white floor that had once marked the bomber's path was scrubbed clean. Without the war, Willow Run was too large, too fast, too specialized to survive. Ford withdrew from bomber production and handed the vast space to new tenants. For a brief time, rows of completed automobiles replaced the aircraft. Kaiser Frazer Motor Company moved in, using the same roof to build civilian cars for a nation turning from ration books to highways. The air of urgency gave way to one of recovery, but the building's bones, steel, glass, and rhythm, still carried the echo of flight. Its impact, however, had already escaped its walls. Willow Run had done more than produce bombers. It had rewritten the language of industry. The methods forged under pressure, modular design, synchronized assembly, just-in-time logistics, became the blueprint for modern manufacturing. Factories across America adopted its system of constant motion and statistical control. From aircraft to electronics, its influence shaped a new age of precision. For those who had worked there, the experience left its mark. The women who had riveted fuselages returned home, some to families, some to new trades that wartime had opened to them. Men who had mastered gauges and jigs became foremen, trainers, engineers, spreading Willow Run's discipline into peacetime factories. The generation that had learned to build bombers by the clock now built a nation by the same measure. The scale of what had been achieved was almost beyond belief. More than 8,600 bombers completed, 40,000 people employed, one aircraft every 63 minutes. Each figure had been born of necessity, yet each became part of the legend that followed. Historians would later call it the turning point where American industry proved it could fight a global war through organization alone. In the decades that followed, the great building found new lives. Portions became test centers for jet engines, research laboratories, and storage hangars. The long runway remained active, carrying cargo and training flights. Visitors walking its halls could still see the faint numbers stenciled on pillars, relics of the stations where bombers once stood. They were not erased. They had become history. For America, Willow Run stood as a monument without marble, proof that production itself could be a weapon. It had shown that the rhythm of machines could decide wars as surely as any battlefront. The factory had turned time into force, precision into power. When peace settled over the nation, Willow Run slept, but its legacy did not. The world it had helped shape, one ruled by scale, flow, and coordination, endured long after the last rivet cooled. The cornfield that once seemed an impossible dream had become the foundation of modern industry. And in the quiet after victory, the empty factory stood beneath the Michigan sun, its walls still holding the memory of a nation that learned how to build triumph 1 hour at a time. Morning light crept across the empty floor of Willow Run. The hum that once shook its walls was gone, replaced by the soft echo of footsteps and the distant creak of steel. Dust settled where thousands once stood. The air no longer smelled of oil or aluminum, only stillness. Outside, grass grew along the edges of the old runway. The sky above, once crowded with silver wings, lay open and quiet. On clear days, a single aircraft still passed overhead, a relic from the war, its shadow drifting over the roof where it had been born. Inside, faint traces remained, numbers painted on pillars, chalk lines where conveyors once ran, the white path where bombers had rolled toward daylight. The factory was silent, but its memory still moved. For 4 years, this mile of glass and steel had turned disbelief into method and method into victory. From farmland to arsenal, from chaos to rhythm, it had built more than bombers, it had built proof. They said it was impossible. Ford called it production. And from this quiet hall, America learned how to turn time into strength, how to build not for the day, but for history, one measured hour at a time.